and welcome to this month's Healthy Living Resources. My name is Amanda Woods, Healthy Finances Program Specialist, and this month I'm going to be joined by Jenny Lobb to discuss digital detoxing, so stay tuned. Welcome to this month's episode of Healthy Living Resources. My name is Amanda Woods. I'm the Healthy Finances Program Specialist with OSU Extension Family and Consumer Sciences. On this month's episode, we're going to be discussing our use of technology, possible overuse of technology, and the need for digital detoxing. So today we are joined by Jenny Lobb. She is a Franklin County Extension educator, and I'm going to just real quick have you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do in Franklin County.
Sure. So my background is in nutrition. I'm a dietitian, and I do primarily programming around healthy living, being active, healthy eating, and stress coping strategies.
Excellent. So before we dive into this month's topic of digital detoxing, just give us a little bit of insight as to why this is something that you feel so strongly about and why this is something that you're choosing to tackle in your work.
Sure. So I was approached actually by a librarian about this topic a few years ago, and the whole term digital detoxing was a new one to me, but I did some research on what it might mean and the need, and found that there is a pretty great need, and honestly I found this to be beneficial to me, not just professionally but personally, as I've tried to implement some of the strategies in my own life.
Perfect. Yeah, we hear a lot about our use of technology. We hear a lot about how much we should or shouldn't be using digital devices, online media, that sort of thing. So before we get into the actual detoxing portion, what we should do, let's talk a little bit about the why we should do it.
Sure.
So give us a little bit of insight into maybe how we're using devices and the impact that it's having.
Yeah, so we're using devices all the time. Technology is just part of daily life in this day and age. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Technology has a ton of positive uses. For example, Amanda and I work for OSU Extension, which is across the state, so we use technology to have meetings that are virtual so people don't have to travel. So there are many positive ways to use technology, but I think what we're finding is that more and more the overuse of technology, where we're attached or even addicted to devices, can have negative impacts on our health and well-being.
So it is kind of hard to know, I think, for us where that line is. Like you said, we're being in an organization where we do work across the state, it is really hard to separate ourselves from working in an online or technologically forward way. So you mentioned the negative impact. Why is it that the use of technology or digital devices, or overuse, we should say, why does that have a negative impact on us? What kind of negative impact do we see from that?
There are many negative impacts. It can be on physical, mental, and even emotional health, and I think a lot of it stems from just the sheer volume of information that we encounter. One analogy I heard that has really resonated with me is that the amount of information we receive on a daily basis is akin to walking into a library and hearing all the books talking at once. So there's so much information coming at us from the news stream, from email, both personal and professional email accounts, from social media, that it's hard for our brains to keep up. They're just not wired to process that amount of information, and so there are effects on our health that come along with that. Everything from feeling anxiety or even depression to physical impacts, not getting enough sleep as we try to keep up with technology, inactivity, living more sedentary lifestyles, and then emotional impacts we're seeing, especially with kids as they're growing up in this age where they are absorbed in technology from a young age, that emotional development is lacking, and social skills need to be learned to an even greater degree than they once did, because so much interaction happens virtually as opposed to in person.
So they're just not getting that connection with other people and really learning how to...
Sure, learning soft skills like, how to make eye contact, learning empathy. For example, if you have plans to have dinner with a relative and you cancel by text message, you never see that person's reaction or disappointment when you cancel, and it has become more normal to communicate over text or over email and not have that face-to-face interaction where you're learning to read others' emotions or even learning to carry an in-person conversation.
It's really challenging, right? Because I feel like the way that we absorb information, and really that, like you said, that pressure for us to engage and constantly be aware of what's going on, has kind of created this environment where we are constantly attached and we feel the need to be constantly attached. And I feel like it affects all of us. Obviously, children are playing games and they're constantly using their parents' devices, probably, and a lot of kids, I think, have their own devices. But even as adults, I find myself mindlessly scrolling through social media, and I'll close my phone and I'll open the phone again 2 minutes later and just start scrolling again. So it really is this just like kind of ingrained behavior now, and it is important, I think, for us to identify the negative impacts, right? Why? So how can we start to, maybe before actually making the effort to change how we're engaging with digital devices, how can we become more aware of the fact that we maybe are overusing them?
Sure, yeah, I think some technology has made it easy now with, iPhone upgrades. If you're an iPhone user, you can actually monitor how much time you're spending in different applications, and actually see how many hours you might spend in your email or on social media or so forth. And know that some of that is okay. For example, if you have a job where you are on a computer using email all day while at work, that's to be expected. But in your free time, you might want to actually pay a little more attention and take inventory in a sense of how much time you're spending in your leisure time on social media versus doing other activities. And I think for families, you might think about what you're doing at home as a family. Are you all sitting in the same room but each on a different device? Or are you having conversations as a family and interacting with the people that are physically present versus those who are on the same platform as you are but not physically present?
It's interesting that you say that, because it just reminded me, one social media platform actually, I think now will give you an alert if you're using that platform for a certain amount of time. And so I thought it would be funny to set a limit for myself. So I set a limit of 30 minutes a day for this specific social media platform. And I'm like, 30 minutes feels like a long time to be looking or scrolling or whatever. And I'm often really shocked when I get that alert that says, hey, you've been using this platform for 30 minutes already today. I'm like, what have I actually accomplished doing this? But it really is just kind of, I think, breaking that habit and becoming aware of the fact that while certain technology use and device use is necessary and important and can have a positive impact, it's really learning where to draw that line. So what are some things that we can do to maybe steer the ship in a different direction?
Sure, yeah, so I think that building that awareness and using tools like setting limits or so forth is a starting step. And then once you've done that initial step, asking yourself those questions you just brought up, such as what have I accomplished in this time? Is there maybe something that would have been more beneficial for me to be doing with my time? And evaluating your purpose in using that technology. Are you trying to keep up with family who maybe doesn't live close by and actually sharing pictures or updates with them, or are you just scrolling through because it's what you do? It's become a habit and it's not really accomplishing anything. And then from there, I think you can set additional guidelines or boundaries. Sure, the actual limits that are built into different platforms are wonderful, but you can also maybe establish some own ground rules, like having a screen-free meal time as a family. That might be an example. Or having a docking station where you can put a phone before bed so you're not tempted to, if you wake up in the middle of the night, pick up your phone and start scrolling through or checking email or so forth. Maybe having a screen-free backyard, so if you can actually get outside, get some fresh air, and get some activity, and aren't tempted to instead just end up sitting and scrolling through a phone. So those are just a couple examples of some boundaries that someone might choose to set.
When we first started hearing about recommended screen time, really putting the screens down and really focusing on detoxing the amount that we use digital devices, it really can be kind of shocking for some people. I don't personally have kids, but for a lot of people who do focus on maybe kids' use of screen time, it doesn't really have to be all or nothing. It doesn't really have to be this like shocking, they can't use it, we can't do this. So what are some ways that we can maybe use screen time? Is there like a positive way to engage as a family with these devices, with certain ways that we engage with digital devices, or should those things be separate?
I think that it certainly doesn't have to be all or nothing. Kids are growing up in this age where technology is just part of culture and life, so they're going to be exposed to it eventually. And I think as a parent, there's opportunity to utilize technology with your children, whether it be watching educational programs together and talking about the content that you're seeing, or maybe setting up limits or rules about what programs children are allowed to use on the tablet or computer or even a smartphone if they have a smartphone, because we know that there are some programs that are much higher quality than others. Some programs might be educational and might be very beneficial, whereas others are more mindless, just more for entertainment. So questions that a parent might ask are, what is my child learning during this time? What is my child gaining? And some of that is more subjective, but I think as an adult, you can make those calls and just feel empowered to make those calls around when and how to let your children use technology.
I was driving here this morning, and as I mentioned previously, I heard a news story where they were discussing the idea of a media mentorship when it comes to your family and the use of technology. And this specific story was actually talking about how the family would get together and play video games together. And so the parents would be engaged in it was just a video game, not an educational experience, but they really felt that it did kind of help break down some of the negative impacts, because they were working through things together. They were explaining how to maybe overcome some difficult things together. The mom actually felt that it helped instill some resilience and kind of teach that lesson of resilience, because when things get hard, I have a nephew and he loves video games, and when things get hard, he really wants to quit. And so there is that lesson. There are lessons that we can kind of build in, and to kind of get around that negative impact. But like you're saying, it's quality. So choosing maybe the right way to interact and engage with technology for youth. We talk a lot about youth, and a lot of maybe millennials also taking this. We hear it with use of the internet, overuse of internet, the amount that maybe millennial age people are engaging in interpersonal relationships are less, the amount that we're having children is less. Like, a lot of things are blamed on technology. But do you think that it's just the younger generations that have this problem, or is it really everybody that could take this lesson?
No, I think this is something that affects everybody. Even, older generations of working adults are most likely using email in the workplace, and it's easy with smartphones and tablets to bring that home. You have access to your work pretty much 24/7, and there's this whole culture now of the ideal worker who responds around the clock, and so I think that's a challenge that certainly affects people of all ages and not just millennials.
And it's probably important how we frame the discussion too, that it's not just around social media or video games. It really is just how we engage. I am also guilty of picking up the phone late at night to respond to emails that I'd know that I'd received, and I am not the only one. I got an email from somebody at 4:30 this morning. So we're definitely, I think, letting it kind of spill out a little bit, maybe too much. Do you think that this is, so we see this problem here in the United States. Do you feel like maybe this is a problem that a lot of people are also trying to address maybe outside of our country? And are there some steps that that are being taken, or steps that we can all kind of take? Because technology obviously does connect us with people around the world, but maybe that's a problem that maybe we're not the only people that are facing.
I'm sure we're not the only country that's facing these issues. I don't know what is being done around the world, and most of the statistics I found are studies or statistics from the United States, but I would imagine that these are similar issues worldwide.
So you mentioned the use of email with work. I'm wondering how we can work to keep that balance when I have just enrolled in an online graduate program, and I know that a lot of people are involved in online school, and so the way that we're engaging with digital technology and devices, it is how we spend a lot of our day. Can you give some suggestions on maybe how to work to have that balance and know where to draw those lines?
Yeah, I think a lot of it starts from within, just accepting that it's ultimately up to you to set your own boundaries, and being comfortable with that, because there's no supervisor telling you must respond to emails around the clock. You have to send that email at 4:30 in the morning or so forth. So it's allowing yourself to have your own boundaries, whether that means choosing to not to access work email from your phone. I know some people who do that when they shut down their computer at the end of the day. It's the end of the day. It might be for someone else, you might still have email come to your phone, but maybe you have a docking station for your phone at night so that you're not tempted to check at all hours of the night. For someone else, I heard one woman say a strategy that she uses is to have the hour that she gets home from work be a transition hour where she is not going to use her phone at all for the first hour she's there with her family, and just be present and try to reframe that time with her family. And then it makes it easier when you're not immediately giving into that urge to keep checking things. It makes it easier as the night progresses to let things go and know that they'll still be there for you the next morning when you check back in.
It really kind of feels like breaking a habit. it. And I mean, for me personally, I know that it definitely feels that way. I mentioned earlier that I mindlessly pick my phone up, I scroll, I don't really realize why I'm doing it. And it seems like it kind of goes back to a lot of other things that we teach in family and consumer sciences, you know, taking action for a more healthy lifestyle, being aware of mindfulness and how we can use those things to kind of maybe focus more on how we're living our lives and doing it in a healthier and better way. How do you feel like maybe implementing mindfulness and being aware of how we're spending our time can kind of, or again, like engaging in physical maybe health or focusing on maybe taking a walk, leaving our devices at home, what are some ways that you could maybe suggest that we could focus on those other areas and we can just naturally let the digital devices kind of sit in the background?
Yeah, so learning to practice mindfulness is a wonderful digital detoxing strategy, and it could just be as simple as if you are taking a walk to choose to leave your phone behind, or if you you know, feel like you need your phone with you in case of an emergency, just having it on silent and paying attention to what's going on around you. It's so easy, whether you're walking or driving, to be so absorbed in what's going on in the world, whether it be news or social media, that you miss what's right in front of you. And so essentially, I think that's, you know, part of mindfulness at its most basic level, just paying attention to what's going on around you, using your senses to be in the moment. And so that would naturally, if you're choosing to practice mindfulness, be a way to hone in on what's happening in front of you rather than what's going on social media or at work or so forth. And another strategy I might mention is turning off notifications on your phone. So if you're someone who's really tempted to check notifications when you hear them or see them come through, choosing to turn off what's not essential. So you might keep phone calls and text messages, but choose to turn off notifications for the email or social media, and then go in and check those things on your own time when you want to or feel like you need to check them.
Right.
But for many, it is actually an addiction, and it's a low-level stress response. When you see that notification come through, we have this spike in our cortisol and feel like we have to check it right away. So taking that action step could help you hone in on what's happening in front of you.
Yeah, there have definitely been times in the past where I have deleted certain apps from my phone because I found myself kind of navigating towards that mindlessly. And we also hear, so anxiety and depression are a major issue, especially in the United States. And you mentioned that could be one of the negative impacts of technology use and social media use. And I do find that sometimes when I'm mindlessly scrolling, I'm seeing pictures of people traveling, or I'm seeing pictures of like doing all these amazing things, and then before I realize it, I feel stressed out, and I'm like, why am I not doing these things, and how come I haven't gone to Bali, and you know what I mean, like things that obviously I would not normally be spinning out or stressing out about. But there's that quote that says that we compare our lives to other people's highlight reels, so just our normal everyday life. So again, just practicing that mindfulness and realizing that like what you're seeing is probably not what's real, and how can we kind of divert our attention back to. All right, great. So what are some other suggestions, especially going back to youth, because I think a lot of young people obviously they've grown up with technology. I think it's easier for people our age and maybe a little bit older to say, well, when I was a kid, I used to play outside and I used to, spend hours, and that's great, but we also didn't grow up with the use of cell phones. They didn't exist until I was in college for sure, or high school. So it's not quite as easy because it is obviously ingrained into the way that they've been brought into this world, especially when mom or dad are constantly scrolling their phone too. So there's probably something to be said for setting that example. So what are some tips that you could make for maybe families with young children to set that example and start that out right?
Well, setting the example is the starting point.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that's where you went with that. It's hard for a child to want to have healthy habits and boundaries if they see their parent constantly on their phone
scrolling.
And there's actually so there was a Diane Sawyer special report just earlier this year where she did some really interesting experiments, and there was one with young children, toddlers, whose parents were told to scroll for 2 minutes straight. And they essentially had to ignore their children.
Oh gosh.
And these children, they were, some were trying to crawl up in front of the phone and in their parents' lap. Others, it was really sad. Others just gave up entirely, and were kind of just felt like, well, they don't see me anymore, so I'm done. And others were screaming, and so a whole range of reactions. But I think it just goes to show that as parents, if we're not setting a healthy example, then we're not going to expect our kids to develop that healthy habit. So that's definitely the starting point there. And having hobbies is important. So it's hard to just get rid of something if you don't have a replacement. So whether that be a sport or playing board games or doing art or music or just getting outside, going to the park as a family, having hobbies or leisure activities that you can enjoy, I think is critical. And then making that conscious choice to leave the technology behind, or maybe you pull it out to use for photos or whatnot, but have healthy boundaries so that you're not using it for the wrong reasons when you're with your loved ones.
And I have to imagine it does kind of also go back to us being okay with maybe being bored or being okay with just existing and not constantly being engaged. We're constantly engaged and bombarded. Like you said, our brains aren't really meant for that, but I think we get used to it. I was driving my 7-year-old nephew around, and we didn't bring his tablet. He's used to being on his tablet in the car, and he said, "What am I supposed to do right now?" And my response was like, well, obviously we're in the car, just look out the window. But then it became clear that he was used to being engaged. So really kind of understanding that it's okay to have that time and to maybe give ourselves a little bit of space to just breathe and not be constantly engaged in something.
Yeah, there's this whole fear of missing out if we're not constantly engaged, and we don't know what to do anymore. But there is benefit to putting things aside, even having some solitude, some time to just let your thoughts roam and spark those creative, innovative ideas.
Definitely. I think there are a lot of good takeaways for probably all of us. If we have kids in our lives, understanding that balance for us as adults, understanding where to draw that line and when enough can be enough. So thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us. This is a really important topic, and I think one that's going to continue to be super relevant to how we're living our lives and how we grow and evolve as people. So thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this month's edition of Healthy Living Resources. Digital detoxing is an important topic, so take some time and maybe address how you are engaging with digital devices in your life. And we'll see you next month.